And the first person that I'm allowed to invite on stage that will open this day and take us into the field of initiative and initiation is Charles Eisenstein. Thank you, Charles, for coming all the way. Welcome back. And I'll hand this mic to you.
It might be helpful to close the doors. I don't know if we need it for ventilation. Yeah. Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the cave here that we're sitting in. And thank you for so many people welcoming me back to YIP. It's really good to be back. It's been, I think, 4 years since I've been a contributor to YIP. And walking around, I'm just getting all kinds of memories. And also getting embarrassed a lot when people are like, Charles, hi. And I'm like, oh, what was your name again? So it's like stepping into a different reality for me, the YIP reality. I'm also quite sad not to see Orland. He and I have become friends, and I so appreciate what he brings. So I thought that I would maybe start talking about initiation, which really means to begin something, to start something. I thought I would invoke Orland Bishop and start with his explanation of the stages of initiation. Maybe he has presented them to you here at YIP, but what I remember him saying is that initiation has 3 stages. The first stage is separation, where you are taken out of your normal context and put in a vulnerable state. Oh, thank you. Put in a vulnerable state because all of the reinforcing relationships and routines and structures of your life are not there anymore. So the question, and you realize who I am and who I thought I was so depends on the people around me and even the buildings around me and the routines of my life. And maybe you experienced this when you came to YIP for the first time. That feeling of, who am I? And maybe the feeling of, I could be different. I could reinvent myself, or maybe a feeling of adventure, that anything is possible because the surroundings that told me who I am no longer exist. So that's the first stage, separation. The second stage he speaks about is a dilemma. A dilemma, meaning a situation where you just don't know what to do. A situation where who you had been is no longer helpful. And the dilemma then calls out a new part of your being that had been under the surface before, that had not been visible. And it calls it into expression. And you discover a new aspect of your being that maybe wouldn't have come out if you had been in your familiar circumstances. The third stage that Orland talks about is celebration. And I think celebration is a lot more than, yay, I did it. Celebration is to be received by a community that recognizes the change that has happened in you, that embraces the new you, the person that you have become. And this part is something maybe YIP cannot do or has not been able to do. Because what happens, and I've heard some stories about this, what happens is you go home after a year at YIP, and other people still are holding you as who you had been before you went. That no longer feels familiar, but you don't have necessarily a community that recognizes what you have been through. And that's very different from initiations in indigenous culture, where after you have gone through this, whatever kind of initiation it is, it could be a deliberate initiation, a coming of age ritual and ordeal, or it could be the initiation of illness, of birth, of tragedy. And people understand that you are no longer who you have been. So the celebration is a welcoming into a new reality, a welcoming, a receiving. It's a reception into your new being. And it's saying, we understand, and we will help you and support you in being this new person, which might still be very fragile, might still be very tender, might still be very unfamiliar. But we see you. Celebration is we see you. For that to happen, there must be a community to hold the seeing. And so this is kind of a dilemma for a program like YIP or any other kind of transformational program. Because who we are becoming through programs like this is not recognized by the larger society. What we are stepping into, it's not only a different stage of life, but it's also a step toward a different stage of our civilization. The purpose of YIP is not so that you can become a more effective consumer and producer in the existing exploitative, extractive, imperialistic commodity economy. It's not so that you can rise to the top and be an administrator of the world-destroying machine. What I see in YIP is a desire to initiate people into another kind of service, serving a new story of humanity that is no longer the story of the domination and control and transcendence of nature, but perhaps a participation, a participation in nature, a reunion with nature, a different kind of relationship than civilization has had, and a different way of seeing the world, and a different way of seeing ourselves, and a different understanding of what is real. It's not just that you come into a situation like this and leave with a different understanding of what is real and a different understanding of who you are, but also creating a template for a collective change from, and so this is how I understand it, that our whole society, even the whole civilization, and by our, I mean the modern world. So it doesn't necessarily include everybody on this planet. It doesn't include indigenous hunter-gatherers who never have used money and didn't go to school. In fact, they are probably more in the new story than anybody else. And in fact, the new story is an ancient story. The new world, the new reality, the new self, the new human identity draws on ancient roots. But by when I say an initiation for our society, I'm talking about modern society, which is indeed facing first a separation, a breakdown in what had been normal to us. And this breakdown visits our own lives as well. As a failure of the program, a failure of the instruction set that told us how to be human, how to be a man, how to be a woman, how to do life, how to grow up, how to get a job, how to do school. Like, there was a program that when I was When I was in my teens, 17, 18 years old, it was very clear how to do this thing called human. And it fit into a social understanding of what the world should be. And that program has really begun to break down. It's become obvious that the way that we've been doing things as a society is no longer working, if it ever was working. The ecological crisis is showing us that. And the persistence of all of our social crises, too. Like, those were supposed to have been solved. We were supposed to have used social science and political science and economics to exert the same mastery over the social world as material technology exerted over the physical world. We were supposed to have solved these problems by now. We were supposed to have engineered poverty out of existence. We were supposed to have abolished racism. We were supposed to have solved the problem of crime and unhappiness and depression and disease. All of these things were supposed to have been solved long ago in a beautiful future that is now long overdue. The future is 20 or 30 years behind schedule. And we're starting to think that this destiny, that our story said, we're moving towards this. We're starting to think that maybe we're not moving towards that. Maybe we're on the wrong path. Maybe we need a fundamental change in our understanding of why human beings are here on Earth. Who we are, what's important, what's real. This is an initiation. An initiation creates this moment of, wow, I don't know who I am. I don't know how to do this. I don't know what's real. That's the dilemma. And that's the dilemma that our civilization is just beginning to wake up to. Part of that awakening is that young people are no longer enthusiastic about the program. 50 years ago, probably every single one of you in this room would have been quite excited to join the program. Which part am I going to play? Am I going to be an atomic scientist? Am I going to invent rockets? Am I going to teach the youth to educate them into this program? What role am I going to play in the grand program of civilization? Better and better, more and more, faster and faster, conquering nature. That was not a problem in people's conception 50 years ago. The conquest of nature was good. What's the next frontier we're going to break through? And that whole way of thinking no longer appeals to us, or to many of us. And so the initiation that we are going through is more than just an initiation from, say, childhood to adulthood. It's more than an initiation from the world of play, where you develop gifts, to the world of work, and really play is supposed to be practice for work, and work is supposed to be playful, where the gifts are turned towards something that is meaningful. It's more than that. It's also part of a collective initiation into a new relationship to nature, a new story of who we are, a new relationship to ourselves. And that is what we need the celebration in order to hold that. We need a welcoming into that story, into that mission, into that purpose. And I think that perhaps our gathering here on the 10th anniversary of YIP is maybe a step toward that celebration, where many people who have come through YIP, gone back home, gone back to their countries, went through a phase of loneliness, a phase of alienation, a phase of no one really understands what's changed in me. No one understands why I'm making the choices I want to make. Maybe I'm crazy. maybe there's something wrong with me. I don't know what to do. And the people who will tell me what to do, they're telling me something that goes against my heart. So many of us may have gone through a phase like that. Maybe some people are still in that phase. So where is the opposite force? Where is the community that says, your choices make sense? You are not crazy. The experience you had was significant. It was a step towards something real. Maybe it wasn't all the way there, but it was a step towards something real. And the best moments you had in that experience were a glimpse of a possible future. Like, where's that? Maybe that's something that we need to do for each other, and maybe this gathering is a step toward that. The celebration phase of an initiation. Is this resonating with anyone? Okay. It's a little hard to tell because the lights are shining in my face, so it's a little hard to read expressions. And I don't want to be like, the guy up front, spouting off knowledge when it's not even meeting a need. That would be part of the old story, actually. Maybe I will, and I'm not actually that familiar with the curriculum that you've gone through it yet. I only did my small part for a few years. But maybe I will underline a few little pieces of a new and ancient story that you might recognize as something that you awoke to in your time here. Something that feels alive in you, even if it's maybe a lonely thing alive in you. Something that wants companionship. The old story, I call it the story of separation, told you who you were, told humanity, told us in modern civilization who we were. It said, you are a separate individual in an objective universe that's outside of yourself. And it said that only human beings have full selfness, full selfhood, full subjectivity, full agency. That only a human being is fully alive and intelligent and conscious. And maybe animals are a little bit, and plants probably not, and definitely not rocks, or the sky, or the earth, or the moon, or the wind, or the clouds, or the water. These are just dead substances. So, of course, they're here for us to use any way we want. That was part of the story. And this is something that it seemed so obvious to the scientific mind of 1950 that this was true. It seemed so obvious that anybody who didn't believe that needed to be educated. And it became a sacred mission to bring that education all over the world. Today, we are, and this might be part of the realization that you've had here, we are stepping into a different self that understands we're not separate from each other, but that who we are is a matrix of relationship, that anything that happens to another being happens to me, that every person that I judge mirrors something in myself, that the world outside ourselves has the same essential beingness as we do, that the world is alive. Therefore, that we have to be very careful in the way that we relate to the world, not just imposing our own will, but listening for the will of other beings and listening for the will of the earth itself and the whole cosmos, so that we can participate in what wants to happen and offer ourselves in service to that which wants to be born. This is, and I'm not saying that this has been explicitly taught to you or introduced to you at YIP, but it might be one of the awakening realizations that comes to you through the program. So that a satisfying life no longer can be a life where you maximize the security and self-interest of the separate self, because you realize this isn't who I am, actually. That goal of financial security no longer makes sense. It becomes, as well, no longer satisfying to participate in a collective story of domination, of transcendence of nature, or of anything that doesn't take into account the full beingness of all creatures, of all humans, of all animals, of all plants, and of the earth itself. And any profession that doesn't understand that becomes repellent. And the pressure is so strong to do it anyway. The financial pressure, the social pressure. What's wrong with you? Why haven't you gotten with the program? Why don't you have a job? Why don't you have a solid career like your parents did? What's wrong with you? Why haven't you gotten your shit together? Why have you been lazy? Why have you procrastinated? Why haven't you made a resume? Those are some of the voices that might echo inside of you. And then there's the lonely voice that says, no, 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 all that is wrong. I'm not supposed to do that. And we maybe can gather together to give a little bit of support to that voice. It's not an easy path. There's no guarantee that if you embrace a new story of interbeing, interconnection, interdependency, interexistence, there's no guarantee that you embrace that and all of a sudden your life flows smoothly and you get a good job after all, doing what you love. These jobs barely exist. They have to be created. The existing structure does not hold much of a place for these things. That is why you need to be not only initiated, but also an initiator. You need to be an agent of bringing into being something that is not yet in three-dimensional being. It exists as a possibility. And it's not something you have to actually create. Just like the initiating elder does not create the adult. He sees in the young man or the young woman, he or she sees the adult that is already there, that wants to be, the adult that is locked inside, and creates conditions to liberate that being, to bring that being into manifestation. And so the same thing is true as initiators of a project, of an organization, of something that does not yet exist, but it gives you a vehicle for the kind of service that you want to give to the world. It does not fit into the world as we have known it. And I'm not saying like there's no, ready-made jobs out there that are resonant with what you want to do, but I think that you will find that even the ones that sound great, like you're going to assist in a permaculture design course or something like that, eventually you'll discover that that they're a little bit confining, that something new wants to happen. And the necessity to take initiative, to initiate something new into being, will still be there. And I hope that your training here at YIP has kind of prepared you to do that. And I want to also put out there that this does not have to be some big, grand project. Part of the old story of separation includes a theory of change. The theory of change says that change happens in the world when you push on it. This is Newtonian physics. If you don't push, if you don't exert a force, then it doesn't change. The planets spin around all by themselves, the cart rolls down the hill, it never stops unless it hits something, unless there's friction, unless you push against it. The world changes through force. Therefore, in that story, if you want to make a change in the world, if you want to have a big impact, you better exert a lot of force. You better make sure that what you're doing scales up. You better make sure that it goes viral. You better make sure that you have a big organization and lots of money, and you're going to be doing a big fancy thing in the world. The problem with that, practically speaking, is that it puts everybody into competition with everybody else to do something big. It puts organizations in competition with each other for mailing lists. It puts, or in competition for Facebook likes, social media reach, mailing list, financial resources. And that competition, that itself is part of an old story that says more for you is less for me in this objective reality. And you can feel like that's just more of the same. The other thing is that whole story of force, of how to change the world, that's also part of the story of separation. And maybe you have encountered in your life, maybe even in your time at YIP or after YIP, maybe you've encountered situations where profound change happened in a different way. It wasn't because you had lots of power, but it was because you happened to be at the right place at the right time, and some synchronicity happened, or something inexplicable, something mysterious happened. At breakfast, a man told a story about, I think it was his chemistry teacher, who had a skin disease that was incurable and no doctor could cure him, and then he took homeopathy and it got better. And his mind said that is impossible because this is just water. It doesn't have a single molecule of the homeopathic substance, yet it worked. So right there, he's experiencing separation from what was familiar, what he thought he knew. And then a dilemma, what do I do with this situation? What do I do with this knowledge? And that initiated him into a completely different life path. So, and that's just like one tiny example, and maybe some of you have other examples of this. One tiny example of a glimpse into another layer of causality that's not based on force. Another way to look at it is through Rupert Sheldrake's concept of morphic resonance, which says that any change that happens in one place creates a field of change that allows the same change to happen more easily somewhere else. Any act of love creates a field of love. Any act of compassion, any act of kindness, any act of aggression creates a field of aggression. And that this operates whether or not you know how that it spreads. Your act of generosity, even if no one ever knows about it, even if it never goes viral on YouTube, it still affects the world through mysterious pathways. And that means that you don't necessarily have to go big with what you do to have a worthy life. Who do you think, for just take an example here, who would you say was the most influential, important person in the history of South Africa? Most people would say Nelson Mandela. And I understand that. But what if you ask, well, how was it that he stayed peaceful throughout all those years in prison and didn't come out of that wanting blood revenge for what happened to him and his people? What gave him that resource? I don't know the answer to that, but I imagine it could have been his grandmother. Maybe it was his grandmother who gave him so much love and so much wisdom when he was a child that he was able to hold that through decades in prison. We don't know. I mean, maybe some people know more about him than I do, but it could be that. So then, who is the most influential person in the history of South Africa? It was Nelson Mandela's grandmother. And what that means, and that's an example of the mysterious pathways that every action ripples out into the world. Every action. In the story of separation, no. Some actions are totally wasted. What if your heart calls you to care for dying people in hospices, or homeless people, or handicapped people, and you cannot say how this is going to change climate change or any of the big social issues in the world. And your heart says, but this is important. And your mind says, how could it be important? But when we understand that we're not separate from all, then we understand that a change in one place is a change in every place. That anything that happens here happens everywhere, because we're all connected. And to live in that understanding, I mean, it makes philosophical sense, maybe, although maybe some smart people will debate me on that. But to a lot of us, it makes philosophical sense. But to live it, that's something entirely different, because everything from our money system to our educational system to our political system to even our physical infrastructure is shouting at us all the time, separation, separation, separation. I mean, even this building here. It's a lot easier to believe that, yes, nature is alive, the world is alive when you're outdoors, when your feet are in the grass, and a lot harder to believe it here. Here, this environment is much more conducive to abstraction and to separation. So, this is the world we're being initiated from and the world we're being initiated into. And it is an initiation that we want to offer in our lives and in our work to initiate our society into a new story. And I'd like to just bring up this element of theory of change, because I've seen so many beautiful, talented, idealistic, dedicated, caring people fall into depression and despair, thinking that what they're doing is not enough. I have a friend back home in Pennsylvania who, she became a mother at age 19 or whatever and has 5 kids, and she's just devoted her entire life to caring for these, even though she was divorced, she was single, she was homeless almost, she put everything she had into raising these beautiful children. Meanwhile, her friends are doing big fancy things in the world, starting this project, and doing things that everybody says, oh yes, you're doing something so important. And she's feeling like she's lesser, that her life has been not valuable. And I'm not saying, so only go and do small things. But I'm saying to trust the impulse of the heart that calls you to care whether that is big or small, and to trust that what will call you is a reflection of the gifts that you carry and the experiences that you've had that make you perfectly suited to do these things. You know, I mean, this way of thinking, even a friend of mine was involved a number of years ago in the Gezi Park uprising in Turkey. And, you know, in that movement, which was an incredible movement, so spontaneous, you know, to, like in 2 days' time, millions of people are out in the streets. But as is often the case, the ones that get the attention and the celebration are the ones who are out on the front lines. But what about, like, the people who are taking care of the people on the front lines? What about the people who are feeding the people on the front lines? What about the ones that are putting the bandages on them and doing all that stuff in the background? Are they less important? So I want to challenge the mindset that only celebrates and validates and inflates those who are doing the big, visible things. Because your life, the worth of your life, does not depend on doing the big, visible things. That's not necessarily what you've been initiated into here. It's not to be a loud person, necessarily. And it's kind of ironic that I'm saying this because I am doing things that like, you know, I travel around, I make speeches, I write books and stuff like that. And in the old story, you could say, okay, well, Charles is having a big impact on the world. And I'm not saying that it's bad to do the kind of thing I do, but you don't have to. It's not more worthy than the person who spends 10 years freeing one orca from captivity, or the person who spends their lifetime building community in a favela in Brazil, like the people in Favela de Paz that I visited with Orland actually a year or two ago. And there are some who are becoming visible in that, but like, what about the women in the background who are holding a space of love so that the young man who is becoming visible and getting into the media can even do that? Like, what about them? Like, they're absolutely as necessary. So if your calling is to do something like that, I just want to say, like, yeah, it's okay to listen to that and not do a big thing.